So today we're going to be talking about resilience and kind of shifting our focus, or talking about how to shift our focus to promoting child mental health and wellness in a positive direction. So Laura already talked about the ARBEST program, and that we're both affiliated with that. And so here I always just like to put a plug and say that I am very thankful for my job and really enjoy all the things I get to do. And one of them is doing presentations like this or webinars and getting to know folks in the community who are helping other Arkansan children and families. And so I'm going to be doing my best to monitor the chat and questions, but so is Laura. So feel free to put questions in the chat and she may kind of poke me if there's any I'm missing. And then I'll also save some time at the end so that we can answer questions as they come up if there are any. Okay, so overview for today. We're going to talk about the role of positive mental health, specifically in the work of mental health professionals and how that kind of applies to that context. And then we're going to talk about the role of resilience building and trauma-informed care and kind of how all of these concepts work together to support kids and families who've been through trauma. And then we're going to talk about strategies and tools that you can use or seek out to build resiliency in work as a mental health professional. Okay. So mental health. What do we think of when we think of mental health? And I would be curious if folks would put in the chat, when I say mental health, what do we think of? What are the words that come to mind for you? I'll give folks just a second to type. I can't see any of you, of course, but. Wellness, absence of mental illness, well-being, coping, emotion regulation. Yeah, y'all are doing a great job. Brain, various diagnoses, families. Perfect. Yep, emotional health. Yeah, this is great. I appreciate y'all answering that. Oh, I see emotions, feelings, emotion regulation. Yeah, so this is great. And I am appreciative of y'all's answers because I think this is a really important thing that y'all are highlighting. What I'm seeing a lot in the chat are things about wellness, which, maybe in part because some of that's what we're talking about, but also maybe in your role as a mental health professional, your focus on helping people develop an increased sense of wellness is an important focus of your job. I'm also seeing a lot of kind of neutrally stated or positive things. So things like emotion regulation, that's not necessarily a struggle or something that's going well. That's just something that people develop. And then things like well-being. So what I have here is a word cloud pulled from some of the most commonly used terms when people talk about mental health on specific web forums and web pages. And so it seems like in our chat, we're talking a lot about like wellness, self-care, emotion regulation. But then when people more broadly talk about mental health, you can see that most of these terms or a lot of these terms are more negatively valence, where we're seeing diagnoses. Oh, and I see in the chat, we've got, when thinking of my clients, I think of like depression, instability, anxiety. And so we're kind of seeing similar themes in this word cloud where people are talking about like worry, grief, stress, all sorts of things, post-traumatic stress, self-harm, crisis, suicide. And so the reason I think this is important is it highlights that the conversation around mental health can be really swayed depending on the audience and depending on how people are talking about it. Versus when we look at something like physical health, apologies, this image is a little blurry, but this is similarly a word cloud pulled from commonly used terms when we talk about physical health. You'll see here a lot of these say health, happiness, relaxation, motivation, exercise, well-being, vitality. And so you're seeing even just within these specific images, there are differences in how we talk about this a lot of times. And I think in the broader public, mental health gets really focused on, you only have mental health if you're struggling and you have a mental health condition. And then other than that, it doesn't exist. versus we know we all have physical health and we all try to do things to, one, keep ourselves not sick and not struggling with pain or illness or other things, but we also do things to be healthier. Like, for example, I drink a lot of water. I don't know that that actually limits me from being sick or helps things in any way, but I know it's supposed to be good for you. So it's a habit I've developed. And so some of what we want to be thinking through together today is, how do we shift this mindset for people we're working with to consider, one, that everyone has mental health, but also that it's something you can invest in and build, even if you are not experiencing a mental illness or significant mental health symptoms, to have a healthy, more fulfilling life. And so when I'm using the term positive mental health, I think a lot of these terms kind of can run together and merge together because there's some similarities. But when I'm talking about positive mental health, what I'm talking about is somebody who can manage their emotions well. So no, that doesn't mean they're not having negative emotions, but they're able to manage them. They're not getting in the way. They're not preventing them from doing things they really want to. And that they have supportive relationships or structures in their life, with the caveat that we know different people need different levels of support and get that support from different numbers of relationships, types of relationships, or different structures or sources like groups or online. I'm also talking about somebody who has a felt sense of purpose in their life, so that they're feeling like, okay, I have a reason I'm getting up every day. Like, I have a reason for what I'm doing. I feel like I have things of value in my life that mean a lot to me. And then again, they're not significantly hindered by their emotional functioning to live a life that they value. So maybe said more quickly, it's about being able to manage stress, express emotions, enjoy life, and also have relationships. And so you can imagine there's a spectrum of these things, right? Lots of people are maybe still figuring out their purpose in their life, or have some supportive relationships and want more. This is something we're all developing and changing and growing in throughout our lifespan. But we're really looking toward, how much is somebody impacted in a negative way by their mental health versus able to cope, able to manage, and able to work in a positive direction. Okay. So you all might be feeling right now, okay, we're all mental health professionals, or a lot of us are mental health professionals. We're not surprised that there's a positive aspect of mental health. That's a key part of our job. And I know that many of us spend a lot of time encouraging healthy coping skills and supports. You know, all the time I'm trying to get people to use something like deep breathing instead of doom scrolling on social media. But one thing I would encourage, and I'm going to be fairly, what's the word? Transparent with y'all today. So I hope you'll hold me with some benevolence. But I want us to take a minute, because I found for me, it's important to consider, how much do I show that I believe this in my actions, right? So again, we all know people have mental health and it can skew in a positive direction. But if I think it's really important for people to build up their mental health in a positive way, even if they are not struggling significantly with a mental health condition or mental health symptoms, do I show that? And so I've got a quote here by Carl Jung that says, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." And I think this is really true in general, but boy, in my experience, there's almost no audience it's more true with than children and teens, where they are looking at what we're doing and investing our time in and making note of that. So it's important to consider, do we work in systems that allow it? I know for a lot of us, we have to demonstrate medical necessity of therapy. And so some of that is that somebody's significantly impaired and they need treatment. And so that may limit our ability to focus on these positive aspects, because if you have enough of a sense of purpose in life where you don't feel depressed anymore, that might mean there's insurance challenges for me to continue to help you. Or maybe our systems are not focused that way, or the treatment models we're using don't focus on that. But I think there are ways we can kind of tweak this and shift it. And I would also say, do we focus on our own wellness and well-being? Do we demonstrate that? I know that sometimes our patients and clients wouldn't see that, but it might show up in more ways than you would think. And then finally, do we value it through our time and attention with clients? I think a lot of times, because we are focusing on treatment, which is part of our role, we might miss that there are things getting in the way of these positive mental health aspects that contribute to the picture that we don't spend a lot of time or attention on. So for example, I have definitely been guilty of maybe seeing a teenager who is experiencing trauma, and they're also having a lot of trouble with their friendships, and they're feeling sad about that. We would, of course, talk about what's important to them and give them space and session to sort through those things. But as a mental health professional who focuses a lot on mental health treatment for trauma, my mind automatically kind of goes in that direction, as thinking that is a really key driver. And it probably is, right? If somebody has post-traumatic stress disorder, we want to treat that. But I can miss those moments where maybe the difficulty in social skills, or the difficulty in navigating a challenge with friends, or the loss of a social group is contributing to the trauma symptoms, right? Like maybe I already feel alone because of my trauma, and now I'm feeling more alone because these friendships or these supportive structures have changed. And so something to reflect on is just, how do we approach this in treatment when kids bring it up and families bring it up, and how do we consider it in our treatment? Um, And if I haven't convinced you that positive mental health is just good, or that we all have it, I have here some outcomes that we see from empirical studies about the benefits of positive mental health. So meaning that they are managing their emotions well enough, they're having supports for social interactions, they're finding a sense of purpose, etc. What we see is that when they are engaged in components that enhance their positive mental health, we see a wide range of improved outcomes, like better academic performance, better social skills, enhanced resilience, which we're going to talk more about in a little bit, healthier lifestyle choices broadly, and of course, reduced likelihood of mental health diagnoses. Kind of like if you knew that the way you were eating, or the kinds of foods you were eating, might make it more likely that you would develop a chronic illness. If you changed some of the things you were eating, or the way you were eating, or varied your diet more and prevented that, you would be reducing that likelihood. The same can be true for mental health, where sometimes people are trending in a direction where we think, oh, this pattern could really cause you problems. It's not quite there yet. So how do we build up these positive things so we start moving in this direction? Um, and then I would also say that when we think about mental health, as mental health professionals, a lot of times we're focused on one thing because we are focusing on treatment. Again, it's our job, it's our role, it's the medical model most of us work in. But mental health is comprehensive. And if we want to think about supporting kids and teens, I think we got to shift the dynamic of how we're thinking about it. So I like to use this house example as ways to think about comprehensive mental health approaches. So we've got the foundation of our house, right, which is safety and support. We all know that children and teens need safe, supportive relationships in their life. And they also need their basic needs to be met, and basic safety around disclosure when they are struggling. So these are some of the baseline things that kids really need to thrive. And we would expect that if something is going awry in that foundation area, that we would see some challenges throughout the house, right? Like if I don't have my basic needs met, it makes sense that my mental health may not be doing very well. That's not necessarily related to habits or other things, but it's just because there are a lot of stressors, and our bodies and minds are geared toward making sure our basic needs are met. We also know that the structure is kind of our frame for mental health. So this is about, like, how are we thinking and talking about mental health broadly? How do kids and teens talk about emotions? Do they have role models? How do they see other people talking about it? Do they know where to find good information when they need it? So for example, if you have some challenges in the foundation, like maybe you need some more safe, supportive relationships, the way that that frame functions for you, where if you think, oh, I need some more safe, supportive relationships, it's causing me problems. I wonder, like, do other kids feel this way? Do I have people I can go to? Do I know how to manage if I feel kind of sad about that sometimes? Do I know where to look for information about that? That can shift the direction that things move in to where kids maybe struggle or don't. Because if my frame is one that's more like, well, nobody should have as many sad emotions as I do, and this shouldn't be such a big deal, that could certainly cause a domino effect to my own mental health and well-being. And then finally, most of us are working on the roof, right? Because we are working for challenging weather. We are trying to buffer when things are hard. We are trying to make it to where there is not water flooding this house, or we're preventing hail damage, or we're helping them prevent their own hail damage. And so this would be things like medication, treatment, extra support from loved ones. And so this is kind of one way to think about mental health really comprehensively. But what I will say is, for a lot of kids and teens, we're really starting and ending with the roof, right? Like, if you are a mental health professional, I'm looking for, well, do you have hail in your house? No? Okay, well, it was really great to see you, but I can't maybe offer you a lot. And sometimes if we are stopping there, where we say, oh, you seem to be doing okay, it doesn't seem like you have a mental health diagnosis, so that's it. And again, professionals can't change some parts of this, because some of it is inherent to our systems that we bill in and operate in. But we can think about, how are we supporting other things just besides this roof? Because I will tell you, you could have the best roof on the planet. You could have the sturdiest, most stable, awesome roof. And if your frame and your foundation of your house is not going well, that's not going to be enough, right? Then you just have a really great roof that's covering something that's crumbling or something that's not working well. I would also say, even though I've now used this house example, is unlike a real house, we can work on these things at the same time, right? So maybe you wouldn't want to put a roof and a foundation on each other at the same time while you're still building it. But also, if your house looked like this one that I have a picture of on the slide, and I said, hey, so I'm not able to do a lot about the foundation and the frame, but I can build a really awesome roof over here and then bring it in, you'd probably say, well, yeah, please do that, Allison, instead of you doing the foundation and frame and then coming to me and saying, oh, we need to work on the roof. Okay, I'll get started on that, right? And so some of what we can think about is, how do we weave these components of positive mental health into our trauma-informed care? And so we're going to talk a little bit about trauma-informed care and resilience here for just a minute. So when I'm talking about trauma-informed care, well, let me pause here. I'm making a lot of assumptions in this presentation, in part because I want to make sure I have some time to show y'all some tools and things, and that we can do some interactive components, hopefully. But I want to say that some of the assumptions I'm making are that we are all on the same page about the idea that, number one, trauma causes a lot of negative impacts to children and teens when they experience it, depending on how they go through that event. Number two, we know from data, Arkansans have high rates of trauma exposure, both in the adult population and in child populations. And so this is a problem that we see across our country and across populations for trauma exposure. But we know, specifically for our state, we have high rates of exposure. Our rates of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, is quite high, and higher than the national average for most of the ACEs. I think there's maybe only one that we don't outpace the national average. And so I'm making some assumptions that we all are in agreement on that. And so if we are in agreement on that, the natural follow-up would be that we want to consider, how are we providing trauma-informed care? And so trauma-informed care realizes the widespread impact of trauma and the paths to recovery. It recognizes the signs and symptoms of trauma, responds by integrating knowledge about trauma into all aspects of the system, and resists re-traumatizing individuals. So these are 4 short sentences that include a lot of components in them, right? Even just that first bullet point, realizes the widespread impact of trauma and paths to recovery. That's a huge undertaking, but it is something that we want to be working toward in our mental health care, especially for kids and teens, again, because I already talked about the widespread nature of trauma exposure for kids and teens in our state. But also because we want to be thoughtful about all of the different paths to recovery. And some of that might include building up some of these positive mental health components. The other really key underlying component of trauma-informed care is, some of you might be saying, well, okay, trauma-informed care makes sense, but like I don't necessarily want to offer like all these trauma accommodations for somebody who comes into my office for depression, like they don't have trauma, or maybe they have anxiety, or maybe they have something else and they don't have trauma. And I think the unfortunate thing is that it is impossible to tell if somebody's experienced a trauma based on you seeing them in person, based on you talking to them on the phone. And to be honest, if you were like me, even based on the information people put in an intake form or the reason they come in for treatment, often trauma is not recognized by people. They're not noticing the things in their life that they've been through that's been traumatic. And so what we want to do is think about this idea of universal precautions, which is if you give everyone trauma-informed care, even if they don't have trauma symptoms or trauma exposure, that's not going to hurt them, right? Like having these extra supports are not going to hurt somebody who doesn't have trauma exposure and symptoms. But the inverse is true, where if somebody comes to see you and they do have trauma exposure and they do have trauma symptoms and they don't get these trauma-informed care principles, that will hurt them. And so we kind of take a universal precaution approach here so that we are not missing people because we're not going to be able to clock it fast enough for everybody. And so when we talk about resilience, which again is a related topic, resilience is the idea that children and teens adapt in a positive way within the context of significant adversity. So what I mean by that is we know that trauma impacts kids and teens differently, right? If trauma exposure was a one-to-one for diagnoses, then we would see much higher rates of PTSD and other traumatic stress symptoms in our community. But we see that there is a bit of variability, and then in fact, most people don't go on to develop post-traumatic stress disorder after experiencing a trauma. And so for a long time, when we were talking about resilience, I think it was framed as like, well, you're just a resilient person, or you've got resiliency. And it was kind of this trait, right? That people possessed or that they were able to create, kind of like you're hardworking, or you are, I don't know, friendly, outgoing, some of these inherent traits that people have temperamentally or can cultivate in themselves. But what we see is that's really not true. It's not a trait that you cultivate within yourself or develop. It's really an interaction between what have I been through and what's the environment around me doing to buffer that, and how does that interact with who I am as an individual person, right? And all of those factors are going to influence how a child responds after a trauma. And so what we want to be thinking about is we know that resilience is really critical, right? If you have a good interaction across all these factors, we can hopefully prevent you from developing a trauma disorder or lead to better outcomes or reduce the likelihood that you're going to experience a trauma again. And all of these things can come from resilience, but we have to think about how is that interaction occurring and how can we enhance it? And so some of that is by considering the factors that comprise resiliency. So one is support from loved ones. You all may know that one of the biggest predictors of trauma recovery for children and teens is having one safe, supportive relationship with a trusted adult, okay? Now I want to note there, I said trusted adult, and I did that intentionally because I don't mean a parent or a caregiver only. For children and teens, it's really beneficial to have the person who is their trusted, supportive adult be somebody who lives in their home with them, or somebody that they see really regularly, like a parent or caregiver. But that does not have to be the only person, right? And so if we're thinking about this idea of supporting resiliency, for example, it makes me wonder in treatment, what are we doing to consider what is the support this child has from loved ones in their life? What do their relationships look like holistically? Of course, for a lot of us, we may focus on family treatment. So we are focusing on building that caregiver relationship or that parent relationship to be one that is more supportive, or that's one that's meeting the needs of both of them better. But also, if kids are still looking for some more of that support, are we spending time in session thinking about how they could find that, how they could build that? I know for myself, some of the supportive adults in my life were people like teachers or somebody who was a part of a social group I was in. And I kind of inherently cultivated those relationships or sought them out, and they became big supports. I wonder if some kids need our help thinking through who that could be and how they could build that relationship, and how you can identify if somebody would be a safe, supportive, trusted adult who could be in your corner. Other things are self-esteem and positive sense of self-worth. Um, so I know that especially if you work with adolescents, I will admit I don't do that as much anymore. I primarily work with kids under 6, who most of which have an incredibly high self-esteem. But if you work more with adolescents, self-esteem is a really key developmental task that they are sorting through in that time frame. And having a high sense of self-esteem and positive sense of self-worth is a big buffer against trauma. If I already think that I just suck and nobody likes me and I'm embarrassing and weird, and then I go through a trauma which can lead to changes in the way I think about myself, you can see how that might be a domino effect, where if I'm already feeling self-conscious and I have low self-esteem and I feel like people don't like me, and then I go through something hard and my brain's now telling me, oh, and by the way, that hard thing happened because nobody likes you and nothing's going to ever be better again. You can have this compounding effect. Versus if we can help kids build a baseline level of self-esteem and positive self-worth, that gives them a buffer against some of those negative cognitions, which is something we see in trauma disorders. So again, it makes me wonder, are we doing things to help kids and teens build positive self-esteem and positive self-worth? Or even beyond that, even if they have really positive self-esteem and positive self-worth, are we teaching them skills for, if this goes awry or if you want to keep working on this, these are things you can do to continue building your self-worth and self-esteem. We also have self-efficacy as a really kind of critical component, and we'll talk about this more in a couple of slides, but this is the idea that kids and teens believe they can do something, right? They believe that they can manage things, they can do things on their own, they are able to accomplish things. And I think if you were like me as a mental health professional, sometimes I think I unintentionally do things to undermine this without meaning to, where I want the people I see to have the most like happy, thriving lives that they can. And as somebody who's done a lot of training in mental health and knows a lot about mental health conditions and mental health and wellness and all of that, there can be an inclination to always be adding on. So maybe a patient or a kid does something really well and you're like, that's great, that's amazing, you did such a great job, you really did an awesome job coping with that trigger or coping with that component, that thing that activated you. Our inclination a lot of times is going to be to build on that and say, but here's how you could do it better next time, or like, one thing you could add is this, or one thing you could do is this. And there is a place for that, right? People are coming to see us because they want to know how to manage things better. And we want to think about, how are we building their self-efficacy? How am I instilling in you the belief that if I disappeared, if I wasn't here to help you, that you wouldn't need me? And I know that for a lot of us, that's our goal in treatment, but we can be doing things unintentionally to undermine that because we care or because we want it to be better for them. So just something to reflect on. Also, a sense of meaning through goals, dreams, values, and beliefs. Now, I want to note, this is really important, that this will fluctuate a lot across the lifespan, right? The way that we might get at some of this for a 7-year-old is going to be vastly different than a 17-year-old because of their stage of development. But what we're looking at here is really that we have somebody who can set goals, has dreams, has values of their own. And so maybe that looks different, right? Like maybe when you're 7, one of your strong values is you want to be a really good friend, or like you want to be really kind, or you want to be really smart. It might be something like that. And it's very concrete, but we want to give kids a sense where they are feeling well enough within their mental health and wellness that they can dream and set goals and have values or invest in their own kind of beliefs. Because one thing that trauma takes away from people a lot of times is the confidence that things will get better or could get better. And so sometimes what we'll see is kids or teens will say, well, I mean, I don't really know why I should set a goal for this, or I don't know why I should be working for this because bad stuff's just going to happen to me. Like I'm just doomed for things to go awry. So why would I set a goal? Because then I'm just depressed and sad when this thing I wanted didn't go the way I want. And so some of that might be, in trauma treatment, trying to address those cognitions and help them feel better. But more broadly, it might mean how are we giving kids and teens and families a space to think through developing their own goals and dreams and values. Um, Also, regulation strategies in relationships and alone. So we know that especially young children, they need to regulate a lot of the time with an adult, right? If you're having your 3-year-old try to regulate their huge temper tantrums all by themselves, most 3-year-olds cannot do that at all. And they need an adult to help them, whether that's like a hold or a snuggle, or we're doing deep breaths together, or we're doing something to kind of calm down. But in general, people need regulation strategies in relationships and on their own. And if you are like me, a lot of times I focus so much on the ones alone, right? Because they're in your control and you can use them. But it makes me wonder, how are we helping the people we see develop those strategies with their loved ones? So when you need something from a relationship, how do you seek that out? Do you know how to do that if you're having a hard day? Do you know how to effectively ask a safe, trusted person in your life to be with you and to tell them what you need? These are things that we could do throughout treatment for kids and teens kind of across the lifespan in different kind of developmental ways. And then finally, an area of talent or skill is one way to really help build resilience. And so this might be something, one, that's kind of fun to integrate in session if you're able to. But something to consider is, how are we supporting those areas of talent or skill in the kids that we see? I saw a kid a long time ago who really, really loved video games and was honestly quite good at video games. And I will admit transparently, I'm not much of a video game person myself, and I'm really bad. And so when we initially started working together, this person would talk about video games, and I would of course, be interested and listen, because I was like, I'm your therapist. I want to know what you're interested in. I want to hear about you. But inside, I was kind of like, oh, we're eating up session time talking about this video game, and I want to do it because I want to build this relationship with you. And over time, we were able to actually use some of that in session, where we talked about, like, just like in video games, you have to be hardworking. Kind of right now, you're being hardworking in your real life. Like, we were able to pull examples from there. But I wish that I had done a better job of recognizing that kids need areas where they feel talented and skilled in, and they're going to be talented and skilled in all different arenas across the case, the case that you have, the caseload that you have. And so are we really facilitating that, enhancing that, and giving that attention in session? So when we're talking about this idea of trauma-informed care and resilience, what we see is that they go together, because where children spend their time is going to influence how they're doing overall, right? So if the school they go to is trauma-informed, that is going to influence how they recover after a trauma and what their process of resilience looks like. The same is true for treatment. Where they spend their time with us and how our system deals with that and how we deal with that as clinicians is going to influence that interaction between, I have been through trauma, how is my environment responding to me? And if we use a trauma-informed care approach, that means that we are actively making our environment more responsive to children and more responsive to their needs, which is making it more likely that they will build resilience. So I mentioned resilience is, I go through something, how does my environment interact with me, and how does that work for me? Part of it is that middle factor of how does it work for me shifts from child to child. Some people need different things when they go through trauma. And if we use a trauma-informed care approach, we have a higher likelihood of being able to recognize that and adjust what we are doing for each child individually. And this is all important for lots of reasons, because we want kids to flourish, all the things about being a therapist and about caring about people. I think that nobody gets into the field of mental health for fame and money. Most people get into it because we want to help people and because we care a lot. And what we know is that trauma exposure increases the risk of future traumatic experiences. And the more traumas you experience, the higher likelihood you are to develop symptoms and to really get stuck in that cycle of trauma and compounding effects, and what often leads to this intergenerational trauma cycle, where maybe I grow up experiencing trauma, I don't get the supports I need, then I'm trying to cope with that trauma as an adult, and the way my body responds to things is different, and then I just continue to experience trauma throughout my lifespan. And so if we can help build resilience, we can hopefully help buffer not just that you have negative outcomes after this trauma, but you also are less likely to experience that trauma later on because you have these supports and have these things to help you. Okay, so I've talked about these concepts for a while, and I know that a lot of this is broad, right? Building a trauma-informed clinical agency is an undertaking. There are people who spend years doing that. And I don't say that to discourage you. I hope that we all are doing that. But I'm going to spend a little time giving you some more pragmatics, and then we're going to talk about some specific tools. So I feel like I've been harping on this, so I apologize if it feels that way. But I think it's important that we model the importance of resilience building factors in treatment as much as possible. As mental health professionals, sometimes we're stuck with the job of, okay, well, you're floating in a boat that has a bunch of holes in it. So our job as mental health professionals is to help you plug the holes. But also maybe there would be less holes if we helped you take care of the boat in the first place and helped you figure out how do you, clearly I don't have a boat, so I don't know all the things that are involved in it. But like, how do you clean it? How do you store it? How do you, kind of buff the scratches out? How do you patch it when something starts showing up? And so the same is true for us. Some examples that you might try are, we know that support from a loved one matters a lot. Those regulation strategies, alone or with people, matter a lot. In your treatment, are you giving opportunities for trusted loved ones to provide support? Clinicians are often going to be really shiny. We know lots of ways to help provide support and be caring, loving adults in the lives of the kids and families we see. But are you able to give those chances to a caregiver or parent? Are you able to let them behind the curtain and kind of talk to them about the things they could do and try, and then setting them up to do it in session? Really setting the stage for the parent, the caregiver, or the other trusted adult to be that person for a child to have, because they're hopefully going to have that adult for a long time, but they're likely not going to have you for a very long time. What about moving beyond addressing negative beliefs about yourself and the world? So when kids go through trauma, I mentioned this, a lot of people develop negative beliefs about themselves. People don't like me, I'm a trauma magnet, or about the world, everyone's bad, everyone's terrible, I can't trust them. In treatment, a lot of us may focus on, well, how do we get you to shift those thoughts and challenge those thoughts and deal with them or process them or be exposed to them? But do we ever go beyond that, where we say, and then this would be how you would build positive ones? Like where you're not just saying, oh, I'm not a trauma magnet, but even maybe a lot of good things come to me when I try, or I think things are going to go well for me because I'm a good person and I mean well. How are we helping them build into that positive mindset in an intentional, authentic way, right? What about, are we believing in kids and their families and giving them appropriate chances to succeed without us? So I've already said this before, but some of it might be, how do you get kids and families chances to demonstrate for themselves that they can do it, right? I know for me, when I've had to learn new things, I always want somebody with me until I kind of am forced to do it. So please hear me out. I'm not saying you force all your kids and families and say, y'all are good, just go on and go and do it. But for a lot of us, we aren't going to know how hard something is on our own until we start trying it on our own. And so some of it might be, how do you set up chances for kids and families to do that while they're still in treatment with you? So that way, if it goes really awry, they still have you to say, oh, that went awry. You know what? We need to figure something else out and we'll try again. and then also intentionally developing a variety of regulation strategies. So I'm going to show y'all some tools about building different kinds of regulation strategies. But the thing I would say is it can be hard to think through, well, what are the coping skills you need in different environments with different people for different emotions? One of my favorite coping skills is I do really well with doing like deep breathing, closing my eyes, and honestly, like a really tiny nap is incredibly helpful to me if I need to have a little bit of a coping skill. And that's a great coping skill, right? We love that. Overall positive, not getting in the way. That's not a coping skill I can use at work, right? Because if I'm in session doing trauma treatment and I close my eyes and I start breathing really heavily, or forbid I take a little tiny nap in the middle of session, that's not going to work. And so kids and teens and families need us to help them think through what could you do in different scenarios for different emotions, and also can we tie that to values and goals. So having that purpose, having that sense of drive and meaning and belief is meaningful, is important for people for resilience. So maybe it is, okay, you're doing this deep breathing at school because you feel worried. Part of why you're doing that is one of your big goals is that you want to be a really, I don't know, really kind friend, right? And you know that when you feel worried, it's harder for you to be kind. So not only are you doing this deep breathing to help you calm down, but you're doing it because it helps you get to something you want. How can we enhance some of that in treatment? And so you see how hopefully that's not asking you to do something drastically different where you're just still teaching a coping skill, but you're tying it back to that resilience factor over and over. Also, framing regulation strategies is skills we all need and should use. I have definitely been guilty of the I only pull out coping skills when you're needing to cope, which part of that is in the name. But some of it might be if you have a child who's coming in for treatment with a parent and the child is experiencing a lot of anxiety and the parent's like, yeah, I'm not bothered. I'm just here to help them. Some of that might be, how do you help this parent or caregiver start using coping skills and modeling that for kids, and showing that we all need that. We all have days where we need to do deep breathing. It's just that some of us have to do it more because we have anxiety disorders or trauma. Also support continued growth versus in case of emergency skills. So again, kind of going back to that boat analogy, if we help people patch the holes and they're doing well, sometimes the approach we use is say, okay, we patched all the holes in your boat, so let's just kind of hang out and see if any holes come up again. That's an important component of treatment, but some of it also might be, again, how do I set you up with this toolkit for in case of emergency, you know what to do? If you leave me and 6 months later, you're really struggling, do you have in a case of emergency plan for how you can help yourself? Do you have a plan over the next 6 months where you're going to continue investing in your mental health and building resilience? And if not, are we able to incorporate that in treatment within the models we use and within our treatment plans and focus on addressing symptoms so that you do leave treatment with those and you have that in case of emergency system? And then finally, are we giving people resources to learn and grow together? So don't be the only holder of coping skills knowledge. And I would expand that to say, you don't want to be the only holder of the knowledge, right? As professionals, we do have specialized training to help people, and that means a lot and is important. And there's a lot of really good places where people can get information. And so are we helping families and kids and teens know where to go? I think sometimes I've been guilty of saying like, ooh, don't use the internet because you don't know what you're going to get out there. That's true. And there's a lot of places on the internet that are really good. I will tell you, as a trauma therapist who got her doctoral degree in psychology, who specializes in trauma treatment, I have learned a lot from Instagram. I've learned a lot of really good things. And so some of it might be, how do we help kids and teens and families know, where could you seek this out elsewhere? Where could you develop more skills? Where could you hear from other people, other professionals, other people who've been through trauma, and learn from them and pull from them? Because I'm not the only person who can help you. And that's also a part of resilience building, right? That's also part of that frame of mental health that we talked about, is who do you go to? Where do you go? And me knowing that I'm not the only one just because I'm your therapist. There are lots of people. And so how do we set you up for that? Okay. So I'm going to talk about some of our tools that we have specifically through AR Connect Now, which is a UAMS project. And I'm going to talk about some of these, show them to y'all, and then kind of give some time for questions. So I will just kind of pause here to note that AR Connect Now is something y'all may be familiar with already. So that's our virtual mental health clinic here at UAMS. It was created in 2020 to offer mental health treatment briefly to folks through telehealth. And so we're still seeing people ages 12 and up primarily for mental health treatment. It's all teletherapy. It's an 8-session maximum. But part of it is it's done kind of quickly, so you can have an intake call within 48 business hours, and most people are able to get their first virtual therapy session within 1 business week, and we accept most major insurances. But we also help find a long-term provider for folks if they need it. And so this service may or may not apply to some of the people you're seeing if they're on your caseload and you're visiting with them. But I like to always put this plug because if you are like me, I'm often getting calls from people who want support and I don't have capacity to take someone, or there's not bandwidth, or our clinic's full, or whatever it is, depending on where you're working. And so this might be a resource that it would be helpful for some people to have. And we also have free care navigation. So even if you are not a client in the clinic, you do not have to be getting telehealth services from us. We have care navigation for people to find resources near them. So that could be basic needs like food, shelter, healthcare services, or even specific needs like diaper drives, insurance enrollment, support groups. And so we've got an online request form and people can get a response within 48 business hours. So again, just a specific resource, but also one that hopefully helps build resilience, because that's circling back to that frame, right? We want to help meet the needs at that foundation level, and some of that might be your basic needs. It would make sense that you have a lot of anxiety if you are not sure you're going to have enough to eat or drink today. In some ways, like, is that an anxiety disorder versus is that you coping with a realistic threat to your health and safety? And so hopefully this is something that will be beneficial to some folks. But we've also expanded the AR Connect Now service to include a lot of online wellness resources. So I want to put a huge caveat here. In no way is this me saying we want to help give kids and families information to find mental health supports and that the only place you can get it is AR Connect Now, right? I think we do have good resources here, and there's also lots of other places that you can find high quality evidence-based information. But this is something that's new and I thought folks maybe wouldn't know about. So we have added some additional web resources that provide education about mental health disorders and treatment, support in getting treatment, and some of that skill building activities, those skill building activities. I see a question in the chat that says, is that available in rural areas? If that's about the care navigation, yes, because that's all also offered like virtually or on the phone. So folks don't come in for that. They submit a request form and then they'll get a call and then they can correspond with someone that way. So this is available in rural areas, but I will say all of the AR Connect Now services are available to people in Arkansas specifically. And so I'm going to touch here on, we have some information on our website, and then maybe Laura can drop the URL in the chat in case y'all would like to see it. But we have a specific component of this website that's geared toward helping kids and teens and families build skills for mental health. And we have it sorted by parents of kids and or parents of children, parents of teens and preteens, and teens and preteens. So I'm not going to read y'all all of this if you see it, so don't be alarmed because it is a big graphic. But this is just a list of some of the domains that we touch on and the resources that we have available on our website. So lots of different topics like healthy diet, sleep, relaxation, feelings, cognitive restructuring, etc. And I'm actually going to show y'all one of ours because some of our resources are geared to be interactive for kids and teens to do with parents or to do with other trusted adults. So if my computer cooperates with y'all, I'm going to try and show you this one. Can you hear that? Someone have to put in the chat. If not.
Sometimes life gets tough and emotions get confusing. To get better at knowing what you feel and how to help yourself, do a body scan. First, turn off your phone. Take a few deep breaths into your belly Then breathe at a normal pace. Scan yourself like an x-ray, starting at your feet. How do they feel? Cold? Hot? Are they connected to the ground? Let the x-rays move through your legs. Think about the muscles and the surface of your skin. Do they feel tense or relaxed? Now scan your lower back and stomach. Do you feel your stomach rumbling or your muscles moving? Scan your fingers, hands, and arms. How do your clothes feel against your skin? Move up to your chest and shoulders. Do they feel tense? Or are they relaxed? Finally, let the x-rays pass through your neck, your jaw, your cheeks, your eyes, and your forehead. How do they feel? Are they heavy? Are they light? Are you feeling something totally different? When you've scanned from head to toe, thank your body for all the work it's doing. Now that you have a clearer picture of how you're feeling, you can make better decisions.
So that's one example of one of the resources we have for teens. And then I'm going to show y'all one. And then I'm going to show y'all one that we have for younger children. All of these are pretty brief.
Animal stretches. Stretching helps my body and mind feel strong and calm. I want to become a zoologist, so I like to do animal stretches. Try it with me. First, dog stretching. Stand with your feet flat on the ground. Slowly bend at the waist until your hands reach the ground. Push your hands and feet into the ground. Then push your puppy tail high in the air. Let your head hang down and relax. You can sniff the grass or wrap. Next, we will do a flamingo stretch. Stand tall. Make a flamingo neck by stretching both arms high above your head. Try to balance on one leg. Rest your lifted foot on the opposite leg. After you practice a few times, see how long you can hold this stretch while taking some deep breaths. I like sitting down for my last stretch. You can do that like a butterfly. Sit on the ground with the bottoms of your feet touching. Use your hands to hold your feet together, then push your knees towards the ground. See, my legs fold like wings. Hold each stretch for a few deep belly breaths. In and out. When I feel anxious or tired, stretching helps me calm down. The next time you need to relax, you should try it too.
Just another example one there. And so I think I'm going to pause there maybe just for time's sake. Oops. But we also have some videos as well that are about mental health stigma and resources on tackling that. And we have content that's includes parents of kids who've been through mental health treatment or other trusted adults talking about their experiences. And so those are also available on our website, just in case you have people who are trying to understand this idea that like everyone has mental health, everyone needs to be talking about it. And so I know that Laura's put some links in the chat, but part of what we're trying to do in Mental Health Awareness Month is really intentionally challenge stigma. And so we also have a resource kind of toolkit and guide about making changes toward addressing mental health stigma for everybody in our community. So I hope that this has been helpful and am appreciative so much of all of the work that all of you do, and that we have so many awesome people helping the kids and families in our area.